Hey guys, so this is actually crazy. I had a proper video planned with a script and a hook and flashy editing to capture your attention. But then I found this and I thought, I can't waste any time on editing. I have to get this out now, even if raw and unedited, because this is very interesting. There's been a lot of hype about Manus AI, and some of you maybe have played around with this already and have experienced it firsthand. But let me show you what I just did because I think it's very important to have the right mindset when approaching this. So, as you can see here, I have this process that I go through every time I start a new software project. It involves creating a new GitHub repo, cloning that repo to my local machine, populating that with basic template files like a Docker file, a gitignore file, a main file, then creating a Supabase database, connecting to it, creating the first table, deploying that whole thing to Railway, and then testing that, seeing if my webhook endpoints work, if they can receive my requests, and if the software can already create rows in my table. And that's the process and the tests that I go through each time I create a new software project. And this takes me about 30 to 45 minutes to do each time. And so I thought it would be great to try and automate this. And everyone at this point has heard of Manus AI. What I did is I went to ChatGPT and I told it about what I wanted to do. I wasn't exactly clear on what Manus AI could do for me or whether I needed MCP. But I just gave it the instructions and what I wanted. It asked me some follow-up questions. I made sure to answer in quite a bit of detail. As you can see, I send it the exact line-by-line instructions for all of the template files. And I answer its question in quite a bit of detail. Um, and then it goes to work, okay? And I think deep research is great as a first preliminary step before going to Manus because Manus charges a lot for credits and you want to have a solid prompt. And so you need to read through all of this. This is very important. You cannot just assume that the things that ChatGPT comes up with are all going to work. And so what you do is you read through all of this, you answer all of its questions, you notify it of anything that you notice that isn't really on point or that you want to be done differently, and together you work on a final prompt. And as you can see here, it is starting to create the final prompt for Manus. It includes all of the template files. It tells it exactly what to do. And even this final prompt isn't ready. I need to still give a lot of feedback, and we go through 3 iterations to end up at a good final prompt, okay? And so we end up with this final prompt that we can paste into Manus. And here I want you guys to really think about this because this is what I think is the mindset you need to have here. So we look at these AI agents and they look extremely flashy and glamorous. Like if you go to the homepage of Manus, it presents all these use cases that look amazing. There's people building entire e-commerce front ends, okay? But I don't like the stuff that's out there about it on YouTube so far because these people they just look at the surface and they just uh, sometimes it all they do is show off flashy videos that they saw on Twitter. And so I wanted to actually try it and report back to you guys. And what I found was very interesting. I will get into it, but first I will share what I think is the correct mindset to have here. So, what you have in any business is tasks and processes. Okay, tasks I define as things you do once, and a process is a task that has to be repeated over and over again. Now, maybe a process doesn't consist of a task that is exactly repeated all over again. Okay, maybe there's little parameters that need to be tweaked each time, but the structure of the task is the same each time you go through the process. Okay. And so we look at something like Manus AI, it looks very flashy, very glamorous, and we think this is going to be the thing that automates every type of process in our businesses. But that's not true because it's expensive and you want to make things cheaper. And if you have a process that is the same each time, you're not going to use something like Manus that's supposed to be that's supposed to have a very broad application across all types of problems. It's supposed to be a general problem solver, not a specific problem solver. But a process like this is very specific. And so the mindset you need to have going into all of this is, how can I use the benefit of Manus, which is a very general, broad spectrum problem solver, and use it to solve a specific problem? So, what you have it do essentially is you have it create a script that automates your process. You don't have Manus do your process, you have Manus create a script, and that script automates the process. Do you get me? Which is a task. The task of creating that script that automates the process is a task that you only need to do once, because as soon as that script exists and that script can automate the process, then you don't need to build that script again, but you can use that script over and over again to repeat the process each time. And so that's what I wanted to do here. I wanted to have Manus create a script that I have on my local machine that just goes through these steps of the process one by one automatically at just the click of a button. First thing that I learned was that Manus does not access your personal accounts. There's no way for you to provide Manus with things like API keys so it can have access to your accounts. That's one of the assumptions that I had walking in, that Manus is going to access my computer and maybe create files there. But that's not how you approach the whole thing. So what Manus does is it has its own virtual machine that it can basically do everything with. That virtual machine is supposed to create a script, for example, test that script, do online research, do all of that, what's necessary, and then it creates a final output, and you just download that final output. And then you need to tell Manus to basically, in your final output, maybe have a environment file with placeholders for your keys. And that's the one step that you need to do manually that Manus still doesn't do for you, which is you still need to then at the end, after it's created its final end product, you need to input your own keys there. It's not too much to ask of you um, if the whole thing worked, but I have made the experience that it doesn't quite do its job. But let me go through this step by step so you guys can see what I had it do. So as you've seen already, I've had ChatGPT create this very, very intricate prompt. And I think a prompt like that should be enough, because if you need to like pre-plan every single line of code that Manus at the end of the day writes for you, then you don't really save much time. I think that's the standard we can hold it to, and we can feel entitled to just being able to have like ChatGPT create a very intricate prompt for us. And as you saw, I did put in the necessary work. I gave lots of feedback. I read through everything. So I did make sure I spent a lot of time on the prompt. But and so I think this should be enough for Manus to work with, but it wasn't. I realize it wasn't. But at the end of the day, so Manus, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to work through this. Um, you see, this is the end product that it creates, so it's not too complex. It has a folder with like API files to access GitHub, Railway, Supabase. It has a main file which is a couple hundred lines long, and it has a README file. It has a bunch of tests. I don't know if it used the tests, to be fair. It has a utils file. which is maybe, yeah, it's 200 lines long. Okay, so it's not too complex of a project. Um, and the first thing that happened is it did not allow me to download any of the files, like it just failed to fetch. So I'm just putting it out there. If people run into the same issue, the way you solve it is you have to share the project with somebody else. You have to have them download it and send the files to you. I don't know why it didn't work, but I'm saying it just in case anyone runs into the same problem. But if we look at the actual code that Manus created, uh, because as you know, what is required here for our use cases, we want to create a database on Superbase, and we want to connect to it. And Superbase is structured in a way where you have an organization, and within that organization, you have multiple projects. And the first thing we want to do is we want to create a project. And for this, it creates this API call called created project. Okay. And to create a project, we need to tell it the organization ID, which is basically just the organization within which we want to create the project. And one of the first things that I noticed, like trying to run this whole thing, was that if we look here and we go to setup, I think setup Superbase, yes, exactly. Here it has the project info, and for the ID, it just makes up a random string. Like it doesn't actually realize that we need to give it an actual organization ID to access an organization, create a project. So that's already where it started to fail. And the problem is this is not too hard to solve. Like you can find that yourself manually. You can still expect there to be some issues, and you could theoretically, if you wanted to, go into the code and fix all of them. But there's just been too many of these types of issues that the amount of time it takes you to sift through the code, first sift through it, understand it, then find where the issues are, then you need to go to the internet and research some of that yourself, because I don't know what API calls I need to make to Superbase. I just know I want to create a project. And Manus is supposed to be able to go to the internet, research how to create a project via Superbase API, and it's supposed to find that out and turn the result of the research into code. But it fails at that. So, for example, it never even created a environment variable for Superbase. So this was not here. I added this. So it was like this, okay? But it's supposed to have an organization ID, which we can use. And it just fails at like these basic tasks. And then you have here it's supposed to create the table. So after it creates a project, it's supposed to create a table. And it uses an SQL query, that's all fine and good. But it makes up a URL that does not exist. And that's also, I think, I don't know what it exactly did, because it has these tests and it's supposed to be able to test all of these API calls. And it doesn't do that. And so I am kind of hesitant to try and use it again, because in the process of trying to create this whole thing, give it feedback, I used up basically almost 1,000 credits. I had 1,000 to start with, and now I'm at 194. I used basically 80% of my credits. And at the end of the day, the amount of time it would still take me to fix this whole thing, I don't know if it would be worth it using Manus. I think you could have ChatGPT create a project outline, a project structure, and just do it step by step and test it each step of the way. There is this knowledge base that you can create for Manus, and maybe you could define very stringent processes for it to test each API call function that it has in a project, for example. It needs to test each one individually to see if they actually work. Um, if you tell it things like that, maybe you can get it to work. Maybe if I gave this a second attempt, it would work. But yeah. So this was my experience that I wanted to share with you guys. I'm really curious if any of you have tried Manus and if you have gotten it to create actual work for you that you could use. Because I know all the stuff we see online is quite flashy. So tell me in the comments. I'm very interested and give me, I'm happy for any feedback that you have. I don't have a call to action yet, but just like if you want to get in touch with me for some reason, just leave a comment below on the YouTube video, and I'll respond back to you. And that's that. Thank you for your time, and I hope this video was helpful.